the elections.
And then we have to start with my mea culpa.
Usually this is like throwing red meat to Sachs, but I mean, at this point, all right, so DeSantis won by double digits in Florida. He got a huge amount of the vote, but all the high-profile Trump-backed candidates seem to have lost. Dr. Oz, Dan Cox, it was a shellacking, I guess, or the red wave became like a puddle or like an eyedropper or something. But some of the Trump-backed candidates did win. Some of the Peter Thiel collection. J.D. Vance won. So I guess that's a big win for Sachs.
That wasn't a Trump candidate, though, because if you remember when Trump went to stump for J.D. Vance, he forgot his name. I got his name wrong.
God, Trump.
So
when
anybody
you got Trump on your side, you don't need friends.
Anybody that Trump actually cared about turned out to be just a complete dud and lost. And everybody that kind of, had to keep him somewhat around just so that he didn't throw bombs actually did decently. But I mean, Trump is just a weight on the neck of the Republican Party, and it's time to just get rid of him.
Sachs, what happened to your red wave?
Yeah, listen, I got this wrong. I think there's a few reasons for it. So I think when you get an election wrong, you have to admit it and figure out what your mistake was. Otherwise, you're not going to improve. I mean, number one, I was looking at the RCP polling, this Real Clear Politics, where they take an average of all the different polls. They were adding a factor to it. They were showing, by the way, +3 or +4 in the Senate for Republicans, but they were adding a factor to it based on the underweighting that the pollsters did in the last election cycle. And it turns out that the pollsters, I think, did a pretty decent job correcting their polls. And so the RCP overweight turned out to be just basically completely wrong. The other thing that I got wrong was I was just looking at the fundamentals. I mean, 3/4 of Americans think we're on the wrong track and we're in a recession. So based on that, you would think that this would be a great year for Republicans. And in fact, the out of power party usually wins in a midterm, and Biden's popularity is at historic lows at like 41, 42%. So everything was teed up for the Republicans. So what went wrong? I think a couple of things. Number one, 2 days before the election, Trump basically comes out and pre-announces that he's running.
Oh, yes.
And, this basically plays into the narrative that Biden has already created, that this is not a referendum on Biden. It's a referendum on democracy. And basically, Trump made it into a choice election. Who do you like better, Biden or Trump? And the fact of the matter is, if you look at the exit polling, as unpopular as Biden is, Trump is even more unpopular. So that did absolutely nothing to help the Republicans, and I think it really hurt them at the margins. The other thing that turned out, I think the other big thing that helped Democrats was Dobbs. And I never thought that it wouldn't be a factor. But if you looked at the polling before the election, 15% of likely voters said that it was their number one issue. If you looked at exit polling after the election, it was 28%. So Dobbs turned out to be twice as significant as what the early polling was showing. And if you remember, Jason, go back to the episode we did on abortion. I said the shrewd play for Republicans here was the Roberts compromise. What did Roberts want to do? He basically was going to allow the 15-week restriction on abortion, but not have the headline of Roe v. Wade overturned. And that basically is what DeSantis implemented in Florida. He basically restricted abortion after 15 weeks. It's the purple state compromise. It's where I think the purple states and where most of the country is going to end up. And the sooner Republicans get their heads wrapped around that fact, the better they're going to be long term.
To ask you one question there, Sachs.
Yeah.
Who stacked the Supreme Court deliberately to turn over Roe v. Wade?
Listen, I mean, this was a long-term priority of Republicans.
That's not a question. That's not a question,
Yes.
J. Cal.
Well, no,
Look,
I mean, we do have to recognize that Trump said he would do that. He did it. So this is doubly Trump's fault.
Every party nominates justices that align with their values, and it cycles. And
Yeah, but Trump said Trump said he would specifically do it in order to turn over Roe v. Wade.
But the president doesn't choose who dies in the Supreme Court and when.
Yeah.
Right.
It's also more complicated than that, because what this Dobbs decision did is throw the issue back to the states. And the fact of the matter is that now it's up to each of these states to determine where they're going to come out on this issue. So if you look at, there were ballot initiatives in red states like Kansas and like Kentucky.
Kentucky rejected a ban.
That's right. That's what I'm saying, is there were pro-life ballot initiatives in red states that lost. And so you can see all over the country that the Republicans tried to go too far, or they do try to go too far when they try to impose a total ban.
Yep.
What it seems to be popular is this, what I'm saying is the purple state compromise. It's what DeSantis did in Florida. it seems like most of the country, we talked about this on that episode.
Yeah.
Most of the country is in the messy middle. They want abortion to be safe, legal, rare, and early. They're willing to support it in, say, the first 15 weeks. But then after that, there need to be some restrictions. I'm saying most of the country supports that. Now, it's also the case that Democrats, though, are staking out a pretty extreme position too, because most of the Democrats were taking the position that abortion should be legal up into the 9th month, which is not even, that's more radical than even Roe. Roe said that you can restrict it after 23 weeks. So, what we said on that podcast, Jason, was the party that gets to the middle first on this issue is the one that's going to do well.
Not just this issue.
Yeah, and I think, yes, I think it's true on this, and I think it's true on other things. So, look, I think the Republicans can correct here pretty easily if they listen to folks like DeSantis and Youngkin and Kemp, people who understand that there's a compromise here. And the ones who basically insist on pushing a total ban are going to go down in flames.
There's a couple of things I think that are worth looking at now that we have all the exit polling and the results. The Democrat strategy of helping to promote these extremist MAGA candidates in the primaries turned out to be a huge winning strategy because every single one that they helped put up against a Democrat, the Democrats won. But number two, so what that shows is the extreme right cannot field a winning candidate. But on the other side, all of these extreme left-leaning Democrats also did not do very well either. And so you're back to, David, what you said, which is we have been saying for a while, the winning strategy is that messy middle. It's the moderate person that kind of like tacks to the center. And this is what you see everywhere around the country, all of the ballot initiatives. Every time you had an extremist ballot initiative, whether it was a complete ban on abortion in a red state or whether it was a tax the rich policy in a blue state, they failed. And so I think the message that you have to take away is the extreme left doesn't work. The extreme right doesn't work. Right? If you look at, for example, like Kathy Hochul almost lost in New York State because of who? Because of like AOC and all of that extremist progressive rank and file of that party. So people need to really understand and look at the data on the ground. If you want to win in 24, you got to be in the middle and you got to clean 100%. Up all of this extremist rhetoric.
Freeberg, any thoughts?
I think the Georgia Senate runoff race that we had in the 2020 election cost the U.S. $10 trillion. And I think because if you'll remember, that was the race that when the Democrats won, tipped the power in Senate to the Democrats, and all this legislation for the last 2 years was passed, including a lot of the fiscal stimulus and spending that very likely may have faced significantly more opposition than could have been faced where the Democrats had the White House and the Senate and the House. And so that single seat and the loss of that seat in the runoff to the Democrat Party, I think ended up allowing a lot of loose behavior over the last 2 years that's going to cost this country for a very long time. And in part, perhaps we could argue a lot of the inflationary pressure and now the debt load, the U.S. debt load increasing by $10 trillion in the last 2 years since that election, by the way. And so I think one of the most important things that perhaps people don't cognizantly recognize, but feel in some way, is that having a balance of power is really important in this country. And so to some degree, while there may be issues that folks can argue about and disagree about, and there may be candidates that are vile to us, I think ultimately folks are recognizing the benefit and the value in having a good legislative debate and a good check and balance in this country. And so I think that there's a lot of what Sachs is saying that ties into that kind of emotional conditioning that's probably underway.
Okay, Sachs. Trump said he was going to announce. He went after DeSantis, called him DeSanctimonious. Obviously, the Trump endorsements here didn't help. Roe v. Wade didn't help the situation. What is going to happen here? Is the Republican Party finally going to cut ties because they want to start winning? Or is Trump going to just announce next week and cause massive chaos? What's going to happen in the Republican Party in the coming weeks? Because we're 14 months away from Iowa, right? I mean, this is now the next issue.
The question comes down to, do Republicans want to start winning elections? Yes or no? And Freeberg brought up the right point. In the last election cycle, he's right that the reason why we got $10 trillion of unnecessary spending is because of that Georgia runoff seat. We're about to have another one where Perdue won that seat on election night, and then Warnock won it in the runoff. Why did things go against Perdue? Because Trump had a 6-week hissy fit after the election. The Georgia runoff happened on January 5th, and then all culminated in the riot on January 6th. So the fact of the matter is, Trump has been having this extended hissy fit and living in denial since the loss in 2020. And as a result of that, we lost the Georgia runoff. I think we did worse than we had to in this midterm. I think we're going to lose the Georgia runoff again if Trump continues with these antics. And so it really comes down to Republicans. Do you want to win? Mm-hmm. And look, I know that there's, call it 40% of the country passionately loves Trump, but here's the problem. He's capped at 40%. Independents and moderates, centrists will not give the guy another look. And so you cannot win a major national election in this country with 40% of the vote, no matter how passionate that 40% is. You know what 40% is? 40% is Charlie Crist, the guy who DeSantis beat, who wiped out in Florida. That was a 60-40 election. That is what a 40% of the electorate looks like.
Landslide.
It's a landslide. Exactly. So the bottom line is that who your messenger is in politics is incredibly important. And Trump just gives his enemies way too much to work with. Now, if he weren't a Republican, it might be different. Take Fetterman, for example. Okay. This guy, Fetterman, okay, he's being portrayed as this man of the people. He's got the goatee and the tattoos and the hoodie or whatever. Who is he really? He's a trust fund kid who never had a job until his mid-40s. But the press completely gives him a pass on that. They would never do that for a Republican. If Fetterman were a Republican, the press would expose him in 2 seconds. Now, that's a complaint, but the fact of the matter is Republicans just have to accept it. These are the rules of the game. If you're a Republican candidate for office, you have to be perfect. You have to be focused. You have to be disciplined. You have to be DeSantis. You cannot give your opponents something unnecessary to work with. Every fight DeSantis picks has been a smart fight that he's won. And same thing with Glenn Youngkin as well. He doesn't give his opponents things to work with. And unless Republicans realize that these are the kinds of candidates we need to nominate in this media environment, we're going to keep losing elections.
Yeah. Chamath, any final thoughts here as we wrap up election?
I'm going to DC next week, doing the rounds, high-fiving, backslapping.
Yeah.
Just to finish the thought, one other quote from New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu, who's he's a Republican who's been in spats with Trump. He said, listen, the message of this election is first fix crazy, then fix policy. If you're coming across like you're crazy, the voters will reject you. Now, that doesn't mean you can't stand for principle. Ron DeSantis says that Florida is where woke goes to die. He says, we will fight woke in the boardrooms. We'll fight in the classrooms. This is certainly not a liberal position. These are pretty conservative positions he's taking, but he does it in a calculated, disciplined way.
I'll say this right now. He is a winning candidate and the scale of Reagan if the Democrats also don't figure out how to clean up their act. Because the other message that's so interesting that I took away is the legislative agenda that works is actually what Biden has always believed. The problem is that Biden seems to get distracted or confused or hijacked by the left wing of his party. And they introduce all these unbelievably crazy iterations of progressive policy that just are not popular, even in blue states. Just look at the number of bills that failed. So he also has to fix what he's doing, by the way.
Well,
because
I mean,
if he doesn't
of things that could fail, a U.S. judge in Texas, I'm not sure, you can tell me if this is legit or not.
No, they stayed, but we should talk about that in the context of the economy, actually.
Well, that was predictable.
Yeah. That was predictable
that the college loans are being thrown out. It's completely unconstitutional for a president to spend $500 billion without Congress's approval. Can I build on Jamal's point here? DeSantis won Miami-Dade County, which went for Hillary by 30 points. Okay. He showed that a competent executive, an energetic, youthful operator who actually runs the state well, okay, can win over moderates and independents and Democrats.
No, he's a winner.
These are the types of candidates Republicans are after.
Yeah.
He's a winner.
He's a winner.